So I've been doing app development for a while. I've put a lot of hats on, uh, done a lot of different roles, be it front end, back end. Done a bunch of different languages, C Sharp, Java, and Node, and everything else. And I just love learning about technology, learning about all sorts of different stuff. And part of it is also, every few years I get this little bit of wanderlust and want to go out and retool, find out, what else is out there, what are other people doing, and what might be fun. There's a lot of great technologies out there. I've always had a philosophy of, you can get the job done with any number of different technologies. You just got to find ones that give you joy. You hold on to it and gives it joy, and that's what I'm going to go and make my career out of. So here lately, I've been doing a lot of C# backend with Angular on the front end, and it hasn't really been doing much for me. So I was out there doing the survey, seeing what else is out there. I never did much with the Blazor MVC side, and I was kind of curious about what was going on in Microsoft space. I remember before the great pandemic that will not be named, that Blazor was coming out. I remember sitting and listening to the talk, and it was really green at the time. Or I felt it was really green, and there was a little bit of confusion there because there's a couple different flavors of Blazor. And everybody was kind of waiting for Blazor or WASM to come out to really see how the cards went out laid down. But then as I started looking onto it, Blazor Server really kind of caught my eye. Not because of what it's doing, but what was not there when I started writing some code and started using it. I noticed some things that were missing, which is kind of weird. I like simplicity. I like taking all the ceremony, all the boilerplate, getting rid of it. It drives me nuts. So when I pulled up Blazor and started seeing some stuff disappear, I was like, wait a minute, there might be something out here. So, kind of want to get together and maybe you guys can share this journey with me and see as we explore Blazor a little bit. Let's see. Now, specifically tonight, we are talking about Blazor Server. There's 3 flavors of Blazor that I can find. Blazor Server, Blazor Hybrid, and Blazor WASM. WebAssembly. I don't even know how you say it. I haven't seen real people in so long. Blazor WebAssembly is using WebAssembly technology. That looks cool, and I plan on investigating that at some point. Blazor Hybrid, actually, when I started researching this is the first time I heard about it. It kind of looks like a Electron for Blazor, where you run Blazor inside of like a web control that runs as a native application. That looks interesting too, but most of my life I've been doing business applications. The type of applications where a user comes up to you and goes, "Hey, this is a really important application. Tons of people are using it. We've got like 200 users." You're like, okay. But I mean, for them, it's true. I mean, that's a lot of people across our. So that's kind of the place I've been working in for a long time. So that's kind of the lens I'm seeing all these technologies through. So let's take a look. Let's take a look at something. So here's a Blazor application, and let me make this bigger for you. Now this is the counter click. Click, 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 click. This is what you get with the default application. Now it's no postback on here. I can demonstrate this. So when you click it, nothing shows up. Your network watch. So how's that going about? Let's take a look at the code. Also been a while since I've. So that is this guy right here. Now this is a page, and there's really not a lot here. And what's interesting is the complete lack of JavaScript. And I don't hate on JavaScript. I did Node for quite a while. I actually love JavaScript. I don't like changing mental context. I don't like dealing with JavaScript that has to have those concepts that get transferred into C# and different structures and different ways you can handle those things. In the past, whether I'm staying in JavaScript all the time or if I'm staying in C# all the time, I find myself being more productive, easier to stay in that zone, in that mindset. So looking at this and saying, hey, there's no JavaScript here. That's kind of cool. Well, nothing's magic. Nothing's magic. So I started thinking to myself, hey, have I seen this before? Has there been a technology before that's done this? How are they doing this? And I started thinking back through the history, and the first thing I thought of was I have seen this before, and this was you could do transpile C# to JavaScript. There were a couple projects out there. A lot of them were 2007, 2011-ish, and they actually did some interesting things. One of those projects was ScriptSharp. Another one was JSIL. Both of these are dead. So I kind of like looking at old dead technology to say, hey, are we repeating the same mistakes? Are we setting ourselves up to make these same mistakes and do? Now, JSIL, you could do some cool stuff with it. I mean, they gave us some great hits like Scapegoat. And if you ever want to do some research on a topic and just stop all your research immediately, Scapegoat's great. You can play that and jump around and but it's a full-on game, little platformer. I wonder if that's actually gonna come through. But what is this doing in the background? It's transpiling all the code from C#. I mean, that's doing that in the browser. That's not for nothing. I know, right? Tell me what's it doing? I mean, it's taking all C#, real C# on the left-hand side, and looking at the IL, and then the algorithm to kind of map it. Now, when I talked to some guys that I've recently talked to one of the leaders in the industry that might be listening online, and he talked about it and said it was actually nice using transpilers. Back then, you could stay in the same language, and once it was set up, it worked. But there's a reason why all these things are dead, right? When you look at the source code for this, it's trying to transpile the base class libraries. And there is a significant difference between what you can do in the browser and what you can do in the base class libraries. And if you get in there, if you think about it, JavaScript being a dynamic language, C# is a statically typed language. You got the way the functions are handled are completely different. Functions first class citizens Java, and then you got C# where you got functions that and events that went through this whole evolution between delegates and multicast delegates and events and then callbacks and lambdas and then expression trees. I mean, think about the difference between expression tree and C#, where you can actually look at all your components. And how would you do that in JavaScript? Not even mentioning threads. No threads in the browser. So I was kind of thinking, well, that's probably why the transpilers died. And I think this one died in 2017 was the last commit to JSIL. So it's been gone for a while. But transpilers really didn't die. There's really a very successful one out there that I use all the time. I love TypeScript. I think if you're going to do JavaScript, do TypeScript. But what makes TypeScript successful? It's a superscript of JavaScript. It doesn't have to deal with that friction between, C# and JavaScript. It's just a superscript. All the features exist there. All the paradigms are all the same. So, transpilers are great, but that can't be what they're doing. You know what? It's not what they're doing on this. If you look at the source code for your little counter thing, you'll see that there's no big old JavaScript that's got transpiled. See that there's no. Really, I'm trying to show you. There's nothing that really gets created with that counter thing in there. So we got. You guys probably can't see that very well, but You got Blazor Server, which is the JavaScript that's generated by, download every time, served up. You got browser refresh, I believe that's connected to Visual Studio. And I got Fluent UI in there because I was playing with Fluent UI library, so that's a subject for another day. That's kind of cool library though. So, not using transpilation. Is transpilation a word? No, it is now. I'm with you on that. So if it's not that, what other technologies? You got to think of where you could run C# in the browser. Well, I can remember one that was really kind of hot stuff back in the day. Oh, wow. There it is. Yeah. And I'm not going to go through and give a whole presentation on Silverlight because he's not even in here. Where the hell is he? I'm going to leave this up here and see if he walks in. Silverlight, I got excited about Silverlight back in the day. Because that was exciting because it was like, you could run the C# in the browser. You had all this power. You had all this, and Microsoft was really hyping it. I mean, at least from my perspective. I mean, you had the 2008 Beijing Games were live streamed with Silverlight. You had all the evangelists coming out and telling you how great Silverlight was going to be. And yeah, then they killed it. I mean, they bad. It was kind of disappointing because after all that hype, all of a sudden it died. In fact, there's I was Googling around, found an article written in 21, so not too long, Visual Studio Magazine. Developers fear being Silverlighted. Because, sure nobody around here knows anything about Silverlight. Yeah. So I did use Silverlight a little bit. It was interesting because it wasn't running the full. When you create your assemblies, you had to decide whether you were going to run it in Silverlight or you were going to run it in full.NET. The two were not exactly the same. You didn't have the same libraries. You didn't have a lot of stuff was just a little bit weird. There was a lot of friction. They had portable assemblies and some other stuff. They were trying to fix it, but at the end of the day, you had to download and install a plugin to your browser in order to make this work. And this was, at the same time as Flash Player was big, and it seemed like every other breach and every other hack attempt in the world was being caused by browser plugins, which I mean pretty much killed off anything that needed plugin. So that's one way I remember of running C# in the browser, but pretty sure that's not what Blazor is doing because I don't know. I didn't get hacked when I downloaded and ran this, so probably not a problem. Well, I've kind of beat around the bush a little bit. The question is, how are we running C# in the browser? The answer is we're not. Trick. We are creating a circuit called a circuit from the browser to the server. If this button works, we're using Signalr to create that circuit. Now, what happens on that circuit is every time that you register an event, so on click, on whatever, on input, on change, whatever, it gets on this WebSocket, and it's website, so it's Signalr, so by default it's going to use WebSocket. Signalr has been around for 9 years now, so it's established technology. It actually has fallbacks to long polling, HTTP long polling, and I think might have other fallbacks as well, but it's pretty much there. It's pretty solid. And every time you have a event that you've registered, it will create a new message on this WebSocket. So take a couple clicks. Also helps if I'm on the right. There it is. Helps if I'm on the right WebSocket. So what these look like. If you actually look at one, it would look something like this. That's kind of a hot mess because they're not just sending JSON up and down. In fact, they're not really terribly clear if you get into the documentation what they are sending up and down. First, this actually did kind of remind, when I first saw this, it kind of reminded me of remoting. If anyone remembers .NET remoting, that was one of those magic technologies where, actually, I think I have an example. Yeah, you could just point it to your remote. You could communicate through different processes. This is remoting. This is not in .NET Core anymore. This is essentially dead. If you run .NET 4, you can actually run it, but you could point it at like your other server or your other process, and it would create this transparent proxy. You can just execute things on others. And it was kind of magic and kind of cool, but you had to be careful because you ended up getting references to objects on another computer. And if you didn't know where that boundary was, you could blow up memory on another computer. You could also spend forever iterating, and not to mention if your assemblies weren't perfectly in sync on both computers, just stuff blew up left and right. That's what I first thought about when I saw that. It kind of invoked that. But then, I got digging through the source code. Blazor Server or Blazor, all of ASP.NET is open source. And if you haven't pulled that down and taken a look at it, it is kind of right. I was going to show it to you, but with everything else running, it just kind of made my computer not happy because it's 500 projects in that solution. But if you look at the solution and try to figure out what's going on here, they're using a protocol called message pack. So message pack is I skipped some stuff. Message pack is like JSON but fast and small. And by the way, if you are still wanting to do Silverlight, there is a new open source Silverlight project out there. Kid you not, it requires Visual Studio. It's not really that. So message pack, it's pretty much JSON but small. It's a binary protocol. Okay, but it's JSON turned into binary. They're using a C# version of it. And then you look at the source code, they start referring to something called Blazor Pack. So they're kind of doing their own implementation of message pack, as far as I can tell. Feel free to look at that yourself. There's a lot of code in there. So there's this weird little binary protocol. And then you get block of JSON. Now that strikes me as weird. I'm not sure why they decided to shove JSON inside a binary protocol. If you look at that JSON, it's going to just contain information about the event that was fired. Now, what's curious about this is it matches up exactly with the arguments to your click event. So when you register on click, you can also do a mouse event arg. No, I don't have one here. If you look at mouse event args, they're going to have the same properties as that JSON. Screen X, screen Y, decline out, all that stuff. So that's pretty much what it's doing. It's hooking onto the JavaScript on the client side. Whenever one of those events, you put, you can wire up to any DOM event. So they've got a couple of defaults, but on click, any DOM event. And it will just take that package it up, send it up to the server and say, and the server will respond with, render me, render this in this area. I opened those packets and I couldn't make heads or tails of them, so don't have much to show you on there. And I'll see that. Oh, there it is. Yeah, I don't know what that's trying to say. But that's kind of the gist of what's happening here. Now that does make me happy in a way, because part of the problems with remoting is you have to keep all your assemblies in line. You had to make sure everybody was on the same page. Well, this JavaScript that goes in there and hooks onto the events, it's not changing with your business code. I mean, it's not changing as you're writing things, and it's being served up by the server, so it's guaranteed to stay in lockstep. So on that side, it's kind of nice, and it seems to work pretty well. I haven't came across anything, but it does have implications. So this is a lovely quick example. I was trying to think of, what's the minimum business screen that I would do. Absolute minimum would be, your stupid search screen. So not stupid, your basic search screen. So if you do a search, so all I'm doing here is doing a search. It's the worldwide importers sample database that being downloaded from Microsoft. Now, what does the code for this look like? This is a little more interesting, because it's kind of standard stuff. They got and this is Razor, so they are using the same syntax with Razor, but they added a couple extra attributes, or a couple extra, I don't know what those are called, at code. But we got kind of basic stuff. You got your header, you got your input, you got a little bind on the input, search on click, stock, and down here in the search when it actually gets clicked. It calls the database. Now, I'm not saying this is how you should structure your code in production. I was just playing around. I wanted to boil everything down to the minimum possible that would actually provide value. And this would be a search screen. I mean, I'm not leaking secrets to the client. I'm not opening my database up to the client. If I threw some OIDC security on this, which you can secure this with the same way you would secure Signalr, you could throw that into production, maybe. There's no REST. There's no REST API there. And that's what really counts. And you go, huh? That's actually a lot of code that you just eliminated. Think about it. You don't have DTOs. You don't have your REST controllers. You don't have your mappers, your auto mappers, all that stuff. Yeah, you probably want to put a view model or something in there and abstract that way into a service, or however you want to structure your APIs. That's an interesting implication of this technology. That's what makes Blazor Server different than Blazor WebAssembly. Because if you run this Blazor WebAssembly, you would have to go through a REST API, right? Or something. Now, there are other implications as well. First one is you got to understand what circuit is. So a circuit is created when you log on the page. When you pull that page up, that Signalr connections created over the WebSockets, and that will live as long as you're on the application. So if you're using navigation, go to a different page and whatnot, it's going to continue to live there. It kind of reminded me of the web form session. That's the length of your your circuit. That's also the length of your scoped injection context. So if you have a scoped injection context of any framework context, it's going to live for the entire. That's terrible. I mean, the context or any framework context are designed to be instantiated quickly, used, and disposed. That's why you have to get into the habit of using Context Factory to create it real quick, use it, get rid of it. But your entire lifetime is going to continue. You don't want to hold that around in memory. This is every time you create a circuit, you're using up memory. And back to web forms, it's kind of like session state in web forms. If you create a service, a stateful service that holds a variable, that variable is going to stick around for the life of the circuit. Now, 1 or 2 users, that's fine. You get up to a couple thousand users, all of a sudden you just maybe made a mistake. All this code is running on servers that, it uses resources. Had to dig into that because that's not enough. That's kind of a significant thing. How many resources is this circuit using? According to Microsoft, you use 250 kilobytes per circuit at a minimum. Okay, that's actually a lot better than I thought it was going to be. If you kind of do the math and go on out with that, at the bare minimum, if you had a P1v2 app service, that would be what, 150,000 or 15,000 circuits. Now, you're going to be doing more than just a hello world, right? You still got to do work. Microsoft says if you expect your app to support 5,000 current users, consider budgeting at least 1.3 gigabytes of server memory. I think that's way optimistic, but that was one of my big concerns about Blazor servers. Hey, are we going to have enough server to run this? I mean, a 1.3 gigabytes of memory, that's kind of your first tier of app services. That's kind of your first tier of VMs or whatnot. However you want to run these. So that actually made me feel a little better about that. Now that doesn't mean that I can take the entire database context, throw it up in memory, and keep it around. Because that would be kind of a tempting thing if you want to turn this into a nice sortable, pageable kind of control. You could just keep it around and just redo it. But it's worthwhile to keep in mind what context you're running and the fact that you are running on the server, even though this abstraction makes it look like you're running on the browser. Now, there's other implications as well. Thing. Yeah. So you also don't want to do something really silly, like if you can hook onto any DOM event. So if you want to hook onto mouse over and mouse out, you could run that. You're going to see just that Signalr just go crazy and sending 4 messages every second. There is that. I did get I'm going to break my flow a little bit here because on the counter, I did find something interesting about this. Is if you start looking at what gets generated in the code, I was kind of curious how this all gets put together. If you pull it up in the assembler, what you actually get, this is the facets. This was not nearly as intimidating as I thought it was going to be. Some of this looks very familiar. So you got route tribute. Kind of reminds me of like a web API route tribute. You extend component base. Partial class. That one I'm going to file away for later. I want to structure this thing a little bit better. Put partial class with the same name and separate your back your HTML. That's kind of nice. And it builds a render tree, and there's the code we had we were written. So that's an entire class. We built this render tree and kind of puts it all there. And that's how it generates what gets sent down to the server. That reminds me a lot of the Blazor MVC type of stuff. I thought that was interesting. You're going way faster than I planned, but going. Now, one thing I did come across that, so it generates all this instance down. That's how it knows what to render. One thing I came across that kind of made me stop in my tracks and go, this is worth keeping an eye on. I'm going to pull this one up so you can read it yourself. Well, I had the right link. Sorry about that. So something that Microsoft says, only mutate document object model with JavaScript when the object doesn't interact with Blazor. Blazor maintains a representation of the DOM and interacts directly with the DOM object. If any element rendered by Blazor is modified externally by using JS directly by JS interrupt, the DOM may no longer match Blazor's internal representation, which can result in undefined behavior. Undefined behavior scares me because I've read that before, right before I just royally got screwed. Now, that's kind of a scary statement. But you kind of get it. So it's running on the server. It's journeying all of its markup. It's journeying all it's done, and then sending it down, trying to patch it all together and get things working together. If you change things on the browser and it's trying to patch together, I could see how that could definitely cause problems. But that doesn't really match some of the other things. So you got Fluent UI. Fluent UI is a nope. Fluent UI is a kind of a cool little library for Microsoft where you can. It's a design framework that you can use to make your stuff look like it was on Azure. Right? It's the same components they use up on Azure, I think. And it's kind of neat and kind of like Material UI for React. But they also have components, web components. Now, when I originally started looking at this and saying, okay, well, Blazor Server, it's got its area where it's really good in. Web components have their areas they're really good in. And maybe they would work really well together. And when you get into Fluent UI, you can get down here into Blazor and they say, hey, our web components interact seamlessly with Blazor. Seamlessly. They even say seamlessly. And they've got things like calendar picker. Calendar picker is going to modify the DOM, right? So there is a way to do it safely. I still have a lot more research to figure out where that line is. And I think if there's something that's going to bite me here soon, and something bites me with the Blazor Server, that's probably going to be it, using JavaScript to modify the DOM when the server still is trying to render that. Now, some other parts that I can't remember, places that bit me before, when using similar technologies, is like web forms. We talked about session state a little bit, and it was kind of considered bad practice. Don't use session state. No matter what you do, you got junior devs on your team, and they start using session state, slap them beside the head and say, stop. Web applications are supposed to be stateless. And there was a reason for that. The minute you started horizontally scaling, you put something with session state behind a load balancer, and one server knew about your session, the other server didn't. So all of a sudden, half your requests failed. So, I started thinking about that. It's like, well, are we gonna get in the same situation? So Blazor Server, you can have it serve up your Signalr connection directly. That works when you're running locally. Works great when you're running locally. It will work as long as you stay on one server. If you get more than one server, all of a sudden you got yourself a problem. The solution to that, there's two solutions to that. It's important to remember this Signalr behind the scene, because this is not a new problem. Signalr has been around for 9 years. People can run Signalr in production across tons of servers. There's two ways to do that. One, Azure has a managed service for Signalr. That's an easy point-click, fire it up, forget about it. You can also use Redis to back your Signalr service. So you use Redis as the backplane for your Signalr, and then you can scale out horizontally that way. That's one of those fun things that I think could catch some people in production, if you don't have multiple servers in your staging environment. Another thing, we are going to be here done quick. Another thing that caught me off guard was, okay, maybe I should just do all the interactions, all the DOM manipulations with Blazor Server. I read a statement from Microsoft saying, hey, either JavaScript needs to own it or Blazor Server needs to own it. Well, I started messing around, and let's go with this one. We got mouse event arg. That mouse event arg is attached to mouse over. And if you look at the mouse event arg, wow, you cannot see that. You'll notice that there's something missing there. There's no target. Can't get the reference from the argument. If you do JavaScript, you always go straight to that target, that reference to the DOM element that your event was hooked onto. Really don't get that. So you can't do reference. There it is. So you set up a interrupt and just point that back to property. Which, by the way, has anyone noticed that everything's private? You don't have to make anything public or anything like that because you're in the same class as what. Not cool. But you set up an element reference. You look at element reference, and this thing, it's got a focus async method, ID, context that's empty. That's it. So that kind of put me off guard for a little bit too. The recommendation from Microsoft is that if you need to make it, or the way I read it at least, if you need to make modifications to your DOM, you got to use the JS interop. I'd love to show you an example of that, but I don't have one. But the JS interop looks pretty reasonable. You basically load up your jobs, you define the function that you want to call. You have to include it inside one of your top levels, so your header or inside your body. You can't include it inside a dynamic element. It'll complain and yell at you if you do that because, well, I don't know, but it will yell at you. And then it's like 3 lines to call a JavaScript function, and you can pass your element reference into that JavaScript function. Once it gets through the interrupt, it'll show up as a DOM element on the other side. So there is a way to modify it that way. So there's a little bit of an out there. Generally, it seems like it's best practice to stick with the kind of the spot or kind of the model that we've been using for a lot of things, be it React or Angular or something, where you have your view model, you push it down, and you just assign those properties to the elements. You don't manipulate the DOM directly like we did with jQuery or anything like that. As long as you stay between those lines, it seems to be good. But there does seem to be dragons there. Well, I did skip around a lot, but glad you guys kind of joined me for this journey as I kind of explored Blazor Server. It is something that I find fascinating. I mean, just the idea of the amount of code that can be removed, the amount of boilerplate, the amount of ceremony that we can just skip by using this really is fascinating. And I think that's something that I can use in my projects and my jobs to really put out some good quality code quicker and make it easier for other people to understand, easier to conceptualize. I think it can make me faster and keep me in the zone by staying in C#. It's probably not for everybody. I mean, everybody's got different projects they got, but it's definitely something that I'm going to be trying out, and that's pretty much all I got.